Imagine discovering a family secret so forbidden, it turns a loyal servant into a mastermind of revenge, toppling an empire of hypocrisy in the dead of night. What if the official history of a tragic massacre was a complete fabrication, hiding a tale of betrayal, blackmail, and cold justice? Tonight, we unearth the buried truth that rewrites American history, one where the oppressed becomes the judge, jury, and executioner. Buckle up, because this story will grip you from the first whisper to the final gunshot. The official record of the Whittaker family of Virginia, sealed in 1862, tells a simple tragic story of a decorated colonel returning from war, his mind broken by its horrors, who brought ruin upon his own house. It is a tale of madness, a dark but closed chapter in the annals of a prosperous county. But this official history is a lie. The true story, a far more sinister account of a slave who caught her mistress in a dark secret with her own daughter and blackmailed them to death, was buried for a century beneath the dust and decay of the Whispering Pines Plantation. It remained hidden until 1964, when a single corroded tin box was unearthed containing a family Bible that held not salvation, but the seeds of a macabre mystery that rewrites a history of madness into a chilling narrative of calculated, inescapable justice. This is the story of how one woman's silence became a weapon, how a family's secret became their tomb, and how the true crime at Whispering Pines was not an act of insanity, but an act of perfect, terrifying retribution. It is a case so profound that it forces us to question who holds the power, who delivers the judgment, and what dark truths lie buried beneath the foundations of American history. If you believe that the darkest sins of history demand to be unearthed, then you have found your sanctuary. We invite you to subscribe and enable all notifications so you never miss an exhumation of a buried truth. Please like this video if you value these deep historical investigations into the shadows of our past. Let us know in the comments from what part of the world you are joining us to uncover this story tonight. The year is 1964. A team from the Virginia Historical Society conducting a survey of antebellum ruins descends into the collapsed root cellar of what was once Whispering Pines, the grand plantation of the esteemed Whittaker family. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and a century of silence. Here, beneath a rotted floorboard, they discover a small tin box, its surface a tapestry of rust and time. Inside, preserved from the elements, lies the Whittaker family Bible, its leather cover cracked like parched earth, the gilded edges of its pages tarnished but intact. It is an artifact that promises a glimpse into the piety of a long-dead family, a testament to their faith. Yet, this Bible held a different kind of testament. When its pages were carefully parted, a discovery was made that shifted the object from a relic of faith to a piece of evidence in a forgotten crime. Pressed between the severe injunctions of the Book of Leviticus was a single brittle flower, its petals blackened with age, but its form still recognizable to the botanist on the team. It was a Tropa belladonna, deadly nightshade, a plant of poison and dark folklore. Its presence within the Holy Scripture was a profound and unsettling contradiction, a symbol of something deeply amiss within the sanctified walls of the Whittaker home. Alongside the flower lay a single scorched fragment of a letter. The paper was fragile, the ink faded, but under careful examination, a few words could be deciphered. Whispers from a ghost. The script was elegant, feminine, yet the words spoke of desperation. Your secret. Freedom. The colonel must never. This fragment combined with the ominous flower stood in stark opposition to the official account of the family's demise. The county coroner's report from 1862 was clinical and brief, attributing the tragedy to the fractured mind of Colonel Theodore Whittaker. The official narrative spoke of a man celebrated for his valor but broken by conflict, a hero who returned to his idyllic home only to succumb to a violent madness. It was recorded that upon his return from a long deployment in the Western Territories, he murdered his wife Victoria and their 23-year-old daughter Beatrice in the grand drawing room before turning his service pistol upon himself. The community accepted this version, burying the family and their tragedy under a veneer of patriotic sorrow. It was a clean, albeit horrific end to a respected family line. A story that asked no further questions, But the contents of the tin box screamed a different truth. A truth that began not with the return of a mad colonel, but with the quiet, watchful presence of a young enslaved woman named Selena, who had been recently assigned to the main house. The Bible, the poison, and the desperate plea on the letter fragment were the first clues in a century-old mystery, suggesting that the ruin of the Whittaker family was not a spontaneous act of insanity, but a meticulously orchestrated event, a slow-motion execution set in motion by a secret that was far more dangerous than any battlefield. This evidence forms the basis of a chilling re-examination of the events of 1862. It suggests a hidden narrative of psychological warfare unfolding within the oppressive silence of Whispering Pines. The Bible, meant to be a record of a family's lineage and faith, instead became the tomb of their darkest secret. The story of the Whittaker family was not one of a hero's tragic fall, but of a sinister family secret, and the silent, cunning slave who discovered it and used it to bring down an entire dynasty from within. A dark tale of American justice served by the most unlikely of hands. The Historical Society's find reopened a case that history had long considered closed. It demanded a new investigation, one that would rely not on the accepted truths of the time, but on the fragmented whispers left behind in personal diaries, financial ledgers, and the faint but persistent echoes of local folklore. The central question shifted from why a hero turned into a killer to what unspeakable truth was hidden within the Whittaker family. A truth so potent that it could be leveraged for freedom, and a truth that once revealed would inevitably lead to death. The presence of the nightshade was particularly haunting. In the language of 19th century botany and folklore, it was a symbol of deception and mortal danger. Its placement within the Bible, a book of absolute moral law, was an act of profound symbolism. It suggested that a poison had seeped into the very heart of the family's moral foundation, a corruption so deep that it could only be purged by an equally potent force. The stage was set for a story far more complex and terrifying than the official records ever dared to admit. The scorched edges of the letter fragment hinted at a desperate attempt to destroy the evidence, a final frantic act to conceal the truth. But the truth, as it so often does, survived in fragments, waiting for a future generation to piece it together. The investigation that followed would reveal a story of forbidden desire, suffocating hypocrisy, and the quiet, methodical dismantling of a powerful family by a young woman who possessed nothing but a terrible secret and the intelligence to wield it like a blade. The first thread in this revised history is found not in a public record, but in the private leather-bound diary of Victoria Whittaker, the matriarch of Whispering Pines. Her entries from the spring of 1862 begin as one would expect from a woman of her station. Meticulous accounts of household management, reflections on scripture, and descriptions of the Virginia landscape blooming into life. Her prose is controlled, pious, and deeply invested in the appearance of order. It is within this carefully constructed world of propriety that the first anomaly, the first note of discord appears in her descriptions of Selena. Selena had been moved from the fields to the main house to serve as a lady's maid for Victoria and her daughter Beatrice. In a household where the enslaved were often rendered invisible, mentioned only in terms of their labor, Victoria's focus on Selena is unusual. She does not describe the girl's work, but her presence. In an entry dated May 7, 1862, she writes, "The new girl, Selena, is proficient in her duties. Yet her stillness is a disquieting force in the house. She moves without a sound. A wraith in the hallways, and her eyes, dark and unreadable, seem to absorb the light without reflecting any of it back." This description is telling. Victoria does not see Selena as a person, but as a phenomenon, an unsettling element that has infiltrated the sanctity of her home. The language she uses is that of someone describing a haunting, not a servant. This initial entry sets the stage for a psychological drama, where the true conflict is not one of master and slave in a traditional sense, but of a watcher and the watched, where the power dynamic is subtly, terrifyingly inverted. The source of Victoria's unease is not insubordination, but observation. As the weeks progress, Victoria's diary entries about Selena become more frequent, more agitated. She fixates on the girl's silence, interpreting it not as the deference expected of a slave, but as a form of judgment, a knowing quiet that unnerves her to her core. On June 15th, she writes, "I find her gaze upon me at the oddest moments. When I am reading in the parlor or speaking with Beatrice, it is not a defiant gaze, but one of deep, unsettling calculation. It is as if she is weighing my very soul on a scale only she can see." This growing paranoia is the first documented sign of a crack in the foundation of Victoria's authority. A mistress of a grand plantation should not be disquieted by the gaze of a teenage slave. Yet Victoria, in her diary, reveals a woman who feels increasingly transparent, as though the carefully constructed walls of her life are being rendered invisible by this silent observer. The anomaly is not in Selena's actions, but in Victoria's perception of them. A perception that suggests a deep-seated guilt looking for an accuser. The atmosphere at Whispering Pines, as described by Victoria, begins to change. The grand house, once a symbol of her family's prosperity and control, becomes a claustrophobic stage for her anxieties. She mentions the oppressive summer heat, the scent of magnolias becoming cloying and funereal, the house groaning at night. These are classic tropes of Southern Gothic literature, but here they are presented as real documented experiences, the external landscape mirroring her internal turmoil. A particularly revealing entry from early July speaks directly to the core of her fear. Beatrice remarked today that Selena seems to know what we require before we ask for it. She meant it as a compliment to the girl's efficiency, but I heard it as a warning. There is an unnatural prescience about her. It feels as though she does not merely serve us, but studies us, learning the patterns of our lives, the secrets of our hearts. It is a terrifying thought. Victoria's world, built on a rigid hierarchy, is being destabilized by the perception of an intelligence where she expected none. This section of the diary is crucial because it establishes Selena's power before any explicit act of blackmail has been documented. Her power is psychological. She has become a living embodiment of Victoria's conscience, a silent mirror reflecting a truth that Victoria cannot bear to face. The horror for Victoria is not the fear of physical rebellion, but the intimate terror of being truly seen by someone she is conditioned to believe is less than human. The final entry that closes this period of quiet observation contains a line that presages the coming storm. After a brief note about her husband, Colonel Whitaker, and his expected return in the autumn, she adds a chilling, seemingly unrelated thought. There are some sins so profound they poison the very air one breathes. Today, the air in this house feels thick with them. The first anomaly has been fully documented. The house is no longer a sanctuary, but a crucible, and Selena, the silent catalyst, is waiting for the moment to turn up the heat. The psychological unease documented in Victoria Whitaker's diary soon manifests in the family's financial records, providing the first tangible evidence of a hidden crisis. In the early summer of 1862, Victoria begins a series of furtive transactions that stand in stark contrast to the family's established wealth. Her diary entries of this period are filled with vague allusions to a poor cotton yield and unexpected expenses, justifications for actions that the plantation's own ledgers do not support. The cotton yield for 1861 had been record-breaking, and there were no documented capital outlays that would explain a sudden need for liquid assets. The first piece of hard evidence comes from the private account book of a silversmith and broker in Richmond, a man named Ephraim Blaine, who was known for his discretion. Blaine's ledger, recovered from a university archive, details a series of transactions with Victoria Whitaker beginning in July of 1862. Over a period of 6 weeks, she sells off significant portions of the family's ancestral silver, a complete sterling dinner service, ornate candelabras, and even a set of silver-backed grooming tools that had been a wedding gift from her husband. The sales are made for gold coin, a form of payment that is difficult to trace. What makes these ledger entries so compelling is not just the sales themselves, but a small unsigned annotation written in the margin next to the final transaction in mid-August. The note, likely made by Blaine or his clerk, reads, "Payment collected by her Negro girl, the quiet one, paid in gold coin as requested." This annotation is the linchpin, the first documented connection between the family's sudden financial bleed and the silent, watchful presence of Selena. The anomaly of Victoria's paranoia now has a quantifiable monetary consequence. Back at Whispering Pines, Victoria's diary reflects the mounting pressure. The entries become shorter, more frantic. She writes of sleepless nights and whispers in the hallways of a growing tension between herself and Beatrice. Beatrice is becoming hysterical, she writes on August 3rd. She weeps for hours, speaking of ruin and judgment. I try to calm her, to remind her of our station, our strength, but my own resolve is crumbling. The house feels smaller every day, the walls closing in. That girl's silence is a constant screaming accusation. The social fabric of the Whitaker family also begins to fray. The plantation, once a hub of social activity in the county, becomes a fortress of isolation. This is documented in a series of letters between Victoria and a neighboring plantation mistress, Harriet Beaumont. In the correspondence, Victoria repeatedly declines invitations to church services, summer socials, and family visits, citing Beatrice's delicate constitution and a sudden, inexplicable need for quiet convalescence. Her excuses become increasingly elaborate and unconvincing. The accumulation of this evidence paints a picture of a family under siege, not from an external threat, but from an internal one. The financial strain, the psychological distress, and the social withdrawal are all symptoms of a deeper sickness. The blackmail, though not yet explicitly named in the documents, is operating like a slow-acting poison, draining the family of its wealth, its peace of mind, and its place in society. Selena is no longer just a watcher. She is an active agent, systematically dismantling the foundations of the Whitaker dynasty. Beatrice's state, as described by Victoria, adds another layer of desperation to the situation. While Victoria's fear is rooted in the loss of control and reputation, Beatrice's appears to be a more profound moral terror. Victoria's diary notes that Beatrice has begun spending hours in the chapel, praying, yet seems to find no solace. She returns from her prayers paler than before, Victoria writes, as if her confessions have fallen on the ears of a merciless God. This suggests that the secret they share carries not just social risk, but a heavy spiritual weight. The pattern is undeniable. The presence of Selena in the main house coincides with the beginning of Victoria's paranoia. The onset of this paranoia is immediately followed by the secret liquidation of family assets. The collection of the payments by Selena provides a direct link, and the entire period is marked by the family's descent into isolation and psychological torment. The evidence accumulates not like a single sudden blow, but like the slow, relentless dripping of water that will eventually wear away stone. The final piece of evidence from this period comes from the plantation overseer's weekly report to the absent Colonel Whitaker. For years the reports had been routine, but in a report from mid-August, the overseer, a man named Gideon Thorpe, adds a personal note. Sir, Mrs. Whitaker has been unwell of late and keeps to the house. There is a strange quiet over the place. It is my duty to inform you that the mood here is heavy. This external observation confirms that the crisis within the main house was beginning to seep out, a palpable malaise that even the staff could feel. The accumulation of evidence was complete. The secret was poisoning everything it touched. Based on the convergence of Victoria Whitaker's agitated diary, the Richmond broker's ledger, and the family's abrupt social withdrawal, a clear hypothesis emerges from the historical record. The evidence strongly suggests that Selena, the young and observant house slave, had discovered a secret so profound and so damaging that it gave her absolute power over her mistresses. This secret was the lever she used to initiate a systematic campaign of blackmail, demanding not just trinkets or privileges, but the very substance of the family's wealth. Gold, the currency of freedom. The scorched letter fragment found within the family Bible serves as the cornerstone of this hypothesis. The words "your secret" point directly to a hidden truth as the source of the conflict. The word freedom reveals Selena's ultimate goal. It was not mere comfort or revenge she sought in the short term, but a permanent escape from bondage, an aim that would require a substantial sum of money. The final desperate phrase, "the Colonel must never," precisely defines the nature of the threat. The secret, whatever it was, was a danger specifically in relation to the family patriarch, Colonel Theodore Whitaker. This hypothesis reframes the entire narrative of Whispering Pines. The events of 1862 were not the result of a sudden psychological break, but the culmination of a months-long high-stakes negotiation. Selena was not a passive victim of the slave system, but an active and brilliant strategist. She had identified a critical vulnerability within the house of her oppressors and was exploiting it with a cold and methodical precision. Her silence, which Victoria perceived as unnerving judgment, was in fact the calm demeanor of someone holding all the cards. The choice of blackmail as a weapon is itself significant. It is a crime of intellect and nerve, requiring a deep understanding of human psychology, fear, and social pressure. For an enslaved girl with no formal education to orchestrate such a campaign against a powerful white family speaks to an extraordinary mind. She was not just demanding money. She was forcing Victoria and Beatrice to actively participate in the dismantling of their own legacy, making them complicit in their ruin with every piece of silver they sold. Furthermore, the hypothesis suggests that the secret itself must have been of a particularly transgressive nature. In the rigid, patriarchal, and deeply religious society of the antebellum South, there were few secrets that could not be managed or concealed through wealth and influence. For Victoria and Beatrice to be so utterly terrified of the Colonel's discovery, the secret must have struck at the very heart of the family's honor, piety, and public standing. It had to be a sin that in the eyes of a man like Colonel Whitaker would be unforgivable. This theory also explains the escalating paranoia and isolation of the Whitaker women. They were living in a state of constant low-grade terror, trapped between two threats: the immediate pressure from Selena's demands and the future catastrophic threat of the Colonel's return. The house, Whispering Pines, became their prison, a gilded cage where they were held captive by their own hypocrisy and the watchful eyes of their slave. Every creak of a floorboard, every unexpected knock at the door would have sent waves of panic through them. The systematic conversion of assets into untraceable gold coin also supports the hypothesis that Selena's endgame was escape. She was not merely punishing her mistresses, she was methodically building a war chest, acquiring the means to disappear from the slaveholding South forever. This was not a crime of passion, but a carefully executed business transaction where the commodity being sold was silence and the price was a new life. This elevates Selena from a simple extortionist to a self-liberator. The moral weight of this hypothesis is immense. It presents a scenario where the oppressed has seized the tools of power, using the moral corruption of the oppressor as the very weapon of her liberation. The Whitaker secret, born of their own private actions, became the key to their own destruction. Selena did not create the weakness. She simply had the acuity to recognize it and the courage to exploit it. The great family was not brought down by an external force, but rotted from the inside out. Therefore, the first comprehensive theory drawn from the sources is this: Selena, through silent observation, discovered a profound transgression within the Whitaker family. She leveraged this secret to blackmail Victoria and Beatrice, demanding the resources needed for her freedom. The entire affair was a ticking clock set to the date of Colonel Whitaker's eventual return. The story of Whispering Pines is therefore not a ghost story, but the story of a brilliant psychological gambit, a desperate race against time, and a dark secret that was about to come due. The psychological prison that Whispering Pines had become for Victoria and Beatrice Whitaker soon manifested as a physical one, as documented by the severing of their ties to the very society they were trying to protect. The record of this social fracture is preserved in a collection of correspondence between Victoria and Harriet Beaumont, the mistress of a neighboring plantation, and until the summer of 1862, Victoria's closest confidant. These letters chart the family's deliberate retreat from the world, a self-imposed quarantine born of fear and shame. The correspondence begins in early July with an invitation from Mrs. Beaumont for the Whitakers to attend a summer picnic, a significant social event in the county. Victoria's reply is polite but firm, declining the invitation with the first mention of Beatrice's delicate constitution. She writes, "Beatrice has been suffering from a nervous malaise, and our physician has prescribed a period of absolute rest and seclusion. I must remain by her side. I trust you understand." It is a plausible excuse, but it marks the beginning of a pattern of avoidance. A few weeks later, another letter from Harriet expresses concern and offers to visit Whispering Pines to bring Beatrice some broth and company. Victoria's response is notably cooler, almost sharp. "Your kindness is appreciated, Harriet, but visitors would only agitate Beatrice's condition. We must insist on complete privacy. The house is to remain quiet." The tone is no longer one of polite regret, but of firm insistence, drawing a clear boundary around her home and her family. The walls of Whispering Pines were becoming literal as well as metaphorical. The social fracture deepens with Victoria's refusal to attend Sunday services, an act that was almost unthinkable for a woman of her standing. The church was the cornerstone of their community, the stage upon which their piety and social status were performed. Her absence was noted. A letter from the local minister, Pastor Hayes, expresses his concern for the family's spiritual welfare. Victoria's reply, if she sent one, is not preserved, but her continued absence spoke volumes. The Whitakers were not just sick, they were hiding. The final preserved letter from Harriet Beaumont, dated early September, is a stark testament to the family's complete isolation. The tone is no longer warm and concerned, but cold, formal, and tinged with the sting of social rejection. "Victoria," she writes, "I have heard the most unfortunate rumors concerning your family's prolonged seclusion. As your friend, I felt it my duty to warn you that tongues are beginning to wag. Your refusal to engage with society is being interpreted in the most uncharitable of ways. I shall not press you further on the matter." The friendship was over. The fracture was complete. This recorded social withdrawal is a powerful indicator of the secret's magnitude. The Whitakers were willing to sacrifice their reputation, their friendships, and their standing in the community, the very things their lives were built upon in order to protect it. The fear of Selena's exposure was greater than the fear of social ostracism. They had made a calculated decision to cut themselves off from the world, believing that containment was their only hope for survival. This turned their home into a pressure cooker, intensifying the psychological torment. The isolation also had a practical effect. It left them completely alone with their blackmailer. With no visitors, no social obligations, and no prying eyes, Selena could conduct her campaign with impunity. The silent, empty rooms of the grand house became the theater for her quiet, relentless pressure. The absence of social life created a vacuum that was filled by the suffocating presence of their secret and the constant unnerving calm of the girl who held their lives in her hands. Victoria's diary from this period confirms the psychological toll of this self-imposed exile. "We are utterly alone," she writes. "The world outside these gates has forgotten us, or worse, whispers about us." Harriet's letter was a blade to the heart, but she cannot know the truth. No one can. Sometimes I feel as if the three of us, myself, Beatrice, and the girl, are the only people left in the world, locked in this silent, damnable dance. This social fracture is a critical part of the narrative because it illustrates the corrosive power of the secret. It dissolved friendships, broke communal bonds, and eroded the family's identity. The Whitakers, in their desperate attempt to hide their sin, had effectively erased themselves from their own world long before the Colonel's return. They had become ghosts in their own home, haunted not by a spirit, but by a living, breathing reckoning that they had to face every single day. For a century, the precise nature of the Whitakers' secret remained a matter of speculation, a ghost at the heart of the mystery. That changed with the 1964 excavation and the discovery of Beatrice Whitaker's private journal. The small, leather-bound book was found concealed within a false-bottom drawer of her rosewood writing desk, an object that had been salvaged from the ruins and kept in storage by a descendant of the Beaumont family. The journal's contents provided the irrefutable evidence that historians had been missing, a raw and terrified confession that laid bare the family's transgression. The journal is filled with poetry, sketches, and the typical musings of a young woman of her class. But a single entry dated July 19, 1862 stands apart. The handwriting, usually elegant and flowing, is jagged and frantic. The ink bled in places as if from tears. It is a detailed, harrowing account of the moment their lives were irrevocably broken. The entry describes a moment of forbidden intimacy between mother and daughter, an embrace that defied the rigid moral and religious codes of their time. It speaks of a bond that had transgressed all mortal and divine law. Beatrice writes of an afternoon in her mother's private chambers, a sanctum within the house. She describes a scene not of coercion, but of a shared desperate affection that had spiraled into something society would deem monstrous. It was in the midst of this profound transgression that the door creaked open. Beatrice's words paint a vivid, chilling picture. Selena stood in the doorway. She did not gasp or scream or flee as any other would have. She simply stood there, her hands folded before her face a mask of perfect placid calm. She watched us for a moment that stretched into an eternity. The terror in Beatrice's writing is palpable. It was not the discovery itself that broke her, but Selena's reaction to it. Selena's unnatural stillness, her lack of shock, was the most terrifying part. It was not the reaction of a frightened slave who had stumbled upon a dangerous secret, but of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. In that moment of silent observation, the power dynamic of Whispering Pines was permanently shattered. The masters had become the slaves, and the slave had become the master. Beatrice's entry concludes with a line that encapsulates the totality of their ruin. She did not say a word. She simply gave a slow, deliberate nod, turned and walked away, her footsteps making no sound on the floorboards. In that silence, I knew our lives were over. She owns us now. She owns our souls. This confession is the missing piece of the puzzle, the irrefutable evidence that confirms the blackmail hypothesis and explains the depths of the family's desperation. The impact of this discovery on the historical interpretation of the case was seismic. The secret was not a simple financial crime or a hidden dalliance with a social inferior. It was a violation of one of the most fundamental taboos of their society, a sin that would not just lead to social ostracism, but to utter damnation in the eyes of their community and their God. For Colonel Theodore Whitaker, a man of rigid military honor and conventional piety, such a revelation would be an absolute annihilating blow to his identity and his family name. This evidence also recasts Victoria and Beatrice's actions in a new, more tragic light. While they were undoubtedly oppressors within the slave system, they were also prisoners of a secret that left them with no recourse. They could not appeal to the law, to their friends, or to their church. Their sin was so profound that it isolated them completely, making them uniquely vulnerable to Selena's calculated pressure. Their paranoia was not just fear of exposure, but the terror of a judgment they believed they deserved. The discovery of the journal transforms the story from a historical mystery into a Greek tragedy. The Whitaker women were undone by a fatal flaw, a hidden corruption that festered beneath a veneer of respectability. Selena was merely the agent of fate, the catalyst who arrived to force a reckoning that was long overdue. Her power was derived directly from their hypocrisy. The greater their public piety, the more devastating the private truth became. Finally, Beatrice's journal solidifies Selena's status as a figure of almost supernatural intelligence and composure. A typical person, slave or free, would have reacted with shock, fear, or revulsion. Selena's cold, calculating calm in that moment is the mark of a truly extraordinary individual. She immediately understood the power of what she had seen and began to formulate her plan. The irrefutable evidence of the journal does more than reveal the secret. It reveals the terrifying genius of the young woman who would use it to burn an entire world to the ground. The revelation of the secret in Beatrice Whitaker's journal marks a turning point in the narrative, a descent from psychological torment into active, desperate malice. The document records the complete moral collapse of Victoria and Beatrice, showing their transformation from victims of blackmail into would-be murderers. Their authority as mistresses of the plantation had long been a facade, but now the last vestiges of their moral authority crumbled into dust as they began to plot the death of the girl who held their fate in her hands. A harrowing entry from mid-August details the moment the thought of murder was first given voice. Beatrice writes, "Mother came to my room last night, her face a pale mask in the candlelight. She whispered that the girl's demands are endless, that the gold will soon run out, and with it our time. She will not stop until she has bled us dry and then exposed us anyway. Mother said, "There is only one way to ensure silence, a permanent one." The words hang in the journal, a testament to their utter desperation. The journal then documents their chillingly practical discussions. They considered various methods, each dismissed for being too difficult to conceal. A fall down the stairs could be questioned. A sudden illness might draw the attention of a doctor. It was Victoria who finally settled on the method, one that drew upon the dark, hidden knowledge of the land itself. Beatrice writes, "Mother procured nightshade from the wilder parts of the gardens today. She remembers the old remedies and poisons from her grandmother. She says the berries, when crushed and mixed with food, can mimic the effects of a swift and violent cholera. This decision is a profound inversion of their roles. Victoria, the pious, civilized mistress, was now embracing the world of folk poisons, the very kind of superstitious knowledge her class so often attributed to the enslaved. In her desperation to maintain her authority, she was resorting to the most primitive and secretive form of violence. She was no longer a victim of a cruel fate. She had become an active participant in a new, more sinister crime, a dark and horrific plot to kill. Beatrice's own moral collapse is charted with painful clarity in her writing. Initially, she expresses horror at her mother's plan, but as Selena's pressure continues, her fear curdles into a cold, resentful hatred. Her final entry on the matter shows a soul that has completely surrendered to the darkness. "We are to poison Selena's evening meal tomorrow. Mother will prepare it herself to ensure no one else is harmed. God forgive me, but I feel no remorse, only a cold, quiet relief. It is her life or ours. We have no other choice." This recorded collapse of their moral authority is crucial. It demolishes any remaining sympathy one might have for their plight. They were not simply flawed individuals trapped by a secret. They had become monsters in their own right, willing to commit murder to protect their hypocrisy. Their actions prove that their concern was never about true morality or redemption, but solely about the preservation of their social standing. They were not trying to atone for their sin, but to bury the only witness to it. The plan to use nightshade, the very flower found pressed in their family Bible, is a moment of profound, almost literary symbolism. The poison they intended for Selena was the same poison that had been corrupting their family from within. Their attempt to kill her was a final, desperate effort to externalize their own guilt, to destroy the mirror that showed them their true reflection. It was a doomed attempt to silence a truth that could no longer be contained. This section of the journal also provides a critical piece of context for Selena's final devastating action. She was not operating in a vacuum. She would have undoubtedly sensed the shift in the atmosphere, the change from desperate fear to a cold, murderous resolve. Her life was in imminent danger. The blackmail was no longer a sustainable strategy. It had become a death sentence. The Whittaker women's collapse of authority forced Selena's hand, escalating the conflict from a psychological war to a fight for survival. The authority that Victoria and Beatrice sought to preserve was by this point an illusion. Their wealth was depleted. Their social standing was in ruins, and their home had become a place of terror. Their final gambit, the plot to murder Selena, was not an act of strength, but the last twitch of a power structure that was already dead. The journal stands as a permanent record of their fall, a chilling account of how the fear of exposure can lead not to confession or repentance, but to the darkest corners of the human heart. While Beatrice Whittaker's journal reveals the internal decay of the family, another far more mundane document discovered in the dusty archives of the county courthouse exposes the silent, brilliant countermove made by Selena. This hidden source is the official ledger of the regional post office located some 20 miles from the Whispering Pines Plantation. It is a book filled with the dry, routine entries of a rural 19th century mail service, records of postage paid, packages sent, and letters dispatched. Yet within its unassuming pages lies the key to the entire tragic endgame. The discovery was made by a diligent researcher in the 1970s, who was cross-referencing all known records connected to the Whittaker family in the months leading up to the tragedy. The researcher was looking for any communication to or from the plantation that might shed light on their isolation. He found something far more significant. A An entry in the post office ledger, dated September 5, 1862, records a single prepaid letter sent to Colonel Theodore Whitaker at his remote military post in the Western Territories. The sender is listed only as a friend, a common enough anonymity for the time. But it is a small handwritten note by the postmaster in the margin that transforms this routine entry into a piece of irrefutable explosive evidence. The postmaster, a man with a keen eye for the goings-on in his small community, had written, "Delivered by the young Negro girl from the Whitaker place, paid in coin, seemed most particular about it being sent with haste." This single sentence is the smoking gun. This hidden source proves that Selena, while under the threat of being poisoned, was not merely waiting for her fate. She was executing the final masterstroke of her plan. The discovery of the post office ledger profoundly alters our understanding of the story's climax. Selena's ultimate weapon was not the secret itself, but the United States Postal Service. She did not need to confront her oppressors, nor did she need to flee in the dead of night. She could bring about their destruction with a piece of paper and a postage stamp. The implications of this discovery are staggering. It reveals a level of strategic genius and foresight that is breathtaking. Selena must have understood that the blackmail was a temporary measure, a means to an end. She also must have recognized that her own life was in increasing danger as the Whitaker women grew more desperate. The letter was her endgame, her checkmate. It was an act of both self-preservation and absolute devastating retribution. The timing of the letter is also critical. Sent on September 5th, it would have taken several weeks to reach the colonel at his distant post. Selena had calculated the travel time, ensuring that the letter would arrive and her master would return precisely when the situation at Whispering Pines had reached its breaking point. She was not just sending a letter, she was lighting a long fuse, knowing exactly when and where the explosion would occur. It was an act of impossible precision. This mundane ledger entry transformed Selena from a clever opportunist into a grand strategist. She did not leave her fate to chance. She controlled the flow of information, the most powerful currency of all. While Victoria and Beatrice were plotting with primitive poisons in the secrecy of their decaying mansion, Selena was using the infrastructure of the very system that enslaved her, the federal mail, to deliver a far more potent and certain poison directly into the heart of the family patriarch. This hidden source is in many ways more chilling than Beatrice's lurid confession. Beatrice's journal speaks of passion, fear, and desperation. The post office ledger speaks of cold, methodical, and inescapable logic. It is the record of a perfectly executed plan. It shows that Selena's final move was not made in haste or panic, but with the calm, deliberate resolve of a master tactician who saw the entire board and knew exactly how the game would end. The discovery of this ledger entry solves one of the case's most enduring mysteries. Why Selena did not simply take the gold she had accumulated and flee. The answer provided by this hidden source is that flight was never enough. Freedom without justice was incomplete. She did not just want to escape the Whitakers. She wanted to erase them to ensure that their corrupt line would end and their hypocrisy would be consumed by the very honor they pretended to uphold. The letter was not a plea for help. It was a death sentence she had written, signed and mailed herself. The post office ledger, in its cold, factual clarity, provides the ultimate justification for Selena's decision to take decisive final action. It reveals a mind that had moved beyond mere survival and into the realm of absolute justice. By the end of August 1862, Selena would have understood her position with perfect clarity. The blackmail had served its purpose. It had provided her with resources, but it had also turned her into a mortal threat. A secret that Victoria and Beatrice could no longer afford to keep. The shift in their demeanor from terrified compliance to a cold, whispering resolve would have been unmistakable to someone with her powers of observation. Selena's decision to send the letter was, therefore, not just a strategic choice, but a preemptive strike in a war she knew was about to turn deadly. She was aware that Victoria and Beatrice were plotting to kill her. The source for this is not a document, but a logical inference drawn from the Whitaker women's own recorded desperation. Selena knew that if she did not act first, her accumulated gold would be meaningless, and her dream of freedom would be buried with her in an unmarked grave on the plantation. Her action was one of profound and necessary self-defense. The brilliance of her plan lies in its use of the master's own tools against him. She did not incite a rebellion or resort to physical violence, actions that would have been crushed by the brutal machinery of the slave state. Instead, she weaponized the very pillars of the Whitakers' world: the Colonel's rigid patriarchal honor code, the sanctity of the family name, and the inviolable authority of the white master. She understood that for a man like Colonel Whitaker, the stain of his wife and daughter's transgression would be a fate worse than death. It would be an unendurable shame that could only be cleansed with blood. The letter itself, though its exact contents are lost to history, can be inferred. It would not have been an emotional plea. It would have been a simple, factual, and anonymous report delivered with the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It would have detailed what she saw, perhaps hinting at the financial ruin and social isolation that had followed. It was designed not to elicit sympathy for her, but to ignite a cold, righteous fury in him. She was not asking him to save her. She was directing him to destroy his own family. This decisive action is justified by the complete absence of any other path to true freedom. Had she simply fled with the gold, she would have become a fugitive, hunted for the rest of her life, not just for being a runaway slave, but for the secrets she carried. By orchestrating the family's self-destruction, she was not just escaping. She was closing the book. She was ensuring there would be no one left to hunt her, no one left to even remember her face. It was a strategy of total annihilation, the only one that guaranteed her a clean slate. The source material, the convergence of Beatrice's murderous plotting and Selena's letter, shows two competing plans for survival coming to a head. The Whitakers chose a path of secret, cowardly violence, poison in the dark. Selena chose a path of open, albeit manipulated justice. She brought the family's sin into the light, not for the world to see, but for the one man whose judgment would be final and absolute. She appointed Colonel Whitaker her executioner, turning the patriarch into the instrument of his own patriarchal system's undoing. Her decision was also an act of profound intellectual and moral courage. It required an almost inhuman level of emotional detachment to place her fate in the hands of the man who legally owned her, trusting that his predictable rage would follow the path she had laid out for it. It was a gamble of the highest order, but one based on a deep, cynical, and ultimately correct understanding of the man and the society he represented. She knew his code better than he knew himself. This action also serves as a final damning indictment of the system she was fighting against. It demonstrates that within that system, the only path to justice for the enslaved was to manipulate the oppressors into destroying one another. There was no court of law, no moral authority to which she could appeal. So she created her own, using the colonel as judge, jury, and executioner. Her decision was not just a plan for escape, it was a radical act of sovereign justice. The justification, therefore, is complete. Faced with her own murder, trapped in a system with no legal recourse, and possessing a truth that could shatter her oppressor's world, Selena made the only logical choice available to her. She chose not to be a victim. She chose not to be a fugitive. She chose to be a reckoning. The letter sent with haste from a dusty rural post office was the final move in her game, a declaration of war that she knew she had already won. The devastating success of Selena's plan is documented in the final primary source of the case. The official inquest testimony of Finn, the Whitakers' young stable boy. His account delivered to the county coroner in October of 1862 is the only known eyewitness report of the tragedy's immediate aftermath. It is a document stripped of speculation or analysis, a stark, factual, and deeply haunting narrative that records the violent culmination of Selena's psychological warfare. The coroner's transcription preserves the boy's simple, unadorned language, which makes his testimony all the more powerful. Finn begins by describing Colonel Theodore Whitaker's unannounced return to Whispering Pines. He did not arrive with the fanfare of a returning war hero, but like a storm front moving in fast and low. The colonel rode in late in the afternoon, Finn testified. He didn't stop to greet no one. His face was like a thundercloud, dark and hard. He threw the reins at me and walked straight to the main house without a word. I knew then that something terrible was coming. The colonel's demeanor confirms he had received the letter and was acting upon its contents. The testimony then moves from silent tension to auditory horror. Finn recounts that he was tending to the colonel's horse in the stables when the sounds erupted from the main house. "First, I heard a scream," he stated. "It was Mrs. Whitaker. It wasn't a long scream. It was short and sharp like it was cut off. Then right after, I heard the gunshots. 2 of them, one right after the other, loud enough to scare the birds from the trees. Then a moment later, just one more." The sequence of sounds meticulously documents the triple homicide. Fearing for his life, Finn hid in the loft for what he described as a long time, until an unnatural silence fell over the entire plantation. When he finally summoned the courage to approach the house, he was met with a scene of absolute carnage. His testimony provides a grim tour of the aftermath. The front door was open. "I saw Mrs. Whitaker and Miss Beatrice in the drawing room. They were on the floor. There was blood everywhere. I didn't go no further in that room. I ran to the colonel's study, and he was there in his chair with his service pistol on the floor beside him." This part of the testimony confirms the official narrative of a murder-suicide. But it is Finn's final observation that shatters that interpretation and elevates the event into something far more chilling. As he fled the house of horrors to get help from the neighboring Beaumont plantation, he saw a figure at the edge of the property. His words, as recorded by the coroner, are the last known sighting of Selena and serve as her unofficial epitaph. "As I ran for help, I saw her, Selena, standing at the edge of the cotton fields watching the house." The description of Selena in this final moment is the interpretive key to the entire story. Finn is asked by the coroner if the girl was frightened or crying. His response is devastatingly simple. "No, sir. She wasn't crying or scared. Her face was calm. Calm as a frozen lake in winter. Then she turned and walked into the woods. Never saw her again." Selena was not a shocked survivor or a grieving servant. She was a witness to the successful completion of her work. Her calm was the calm of a mission accomplished. Her final action, turning and walking into the woods, is not the act of a panicked fugitive, but of someone who is finally truly free. She did not run. She walked. She melted into the landscape. Her purpose served, her enemies vanquished. The woods represent a departure from the world of slavery and a return to a state of nature, of sovereignty. She did not just escape the plantation, she transcended it, disappearing from the historical record as if she were a spirit returning to the earth. The interpretation of Finn's testimony is clear. Colonel Whitaker was not a madman. He was an instrument. He had been wound up by Selena's letter and set upon his own family, performing the role she had assigned him with brutal efficiency. The drawing room of Whispering Pines was not the scene of a random act of violence, but the final bloody act of a tragedy that Selena had scripted from the very beginning. Finn's testimony is the final brutal punctuation mark on the story. It provides the visual evidence of the ruin that the other documents only hinted at. And in its final haunting image of Selena, it captures the profound and terrifying essence of her character. A figure of absolute stillness, of perfect control, a ghost of vengeance who watched her creation burn before disappearing forever, leaving behind nothing but a legend and a silence more profound than any scream. In the aftermath of the bloodbath at Whispering Pines, the historical record shows a swift and deliberate effort to close the book on the Whitaker family. The official inquest, relying heavily on Finn's testimony of the body's discovery and the colonel's recent return from a taxing military campaign, concluded within a week. The verdict was murder-suicide, attributed to a temporary but severe mental derangement on the part of Colonel Whitaker. This official story, clean and contained, was immediately adopted by the community, who were eager to bury the scandal along with the bodies. The consequences for the plantation itself were immediate and final. With no direct heirs, Whispering Pines fell into a legal quagmire. The property was heavily leveraged, a fact Victoria had likely concealed from her husband, and the gold she had given Selena had drained its liquid reserves. Within months, creditors seized the estate. The land was parceled off and sold, and the grand house, now stained by its violent history, was left to rot. The 1865 census lists the Whispering Pines Plantation as abandoned, a silent monument to a fallen dynasty. The human property of the estate, the enslaved men, women, and children, were sold off to settle the remaining debts. Their fates are scattered across the ledgers of slave traders in Virginia and the surrounding states. a final brutal dispersal of a community that had lived and worked on that land for generations. They were the silent witnesses and the final victims of the Whitakers' downfall. Their lives irrevocably altered by a drama they were never meant to understand. All of them, that is, except one. A perfunctory runaway slave notice for a girl named Selena Brooks was filed by the estate's executor in late October of 1862. The description is brief. Age approx 17, slight of build, quiet disposition. A paltry reward was offered, but there is no record of her ever being pursued with any real effort, and certainly no record of her capture. In the chaos of the estate's dissolution, she simply vanished. Selena Brooks ceases to exist in any official document from that day forward. She successfully erased herself from the historical record, but where official history ends, folklore begins. For the remainder of the 19th century and well into the 20th, local legends in the county spoke of the ruins of Whispering Pines being haunted. But the ghost was not the enraged colonel or his tragic victims. The stories told by former slaves and their descendants were of a different spirit. That of a quiet, watchful young woman who could be seen standing at the edge of the woods at dusk, looking at the crumbling remains of the main house. This local legend became the sole guardian of Selena's legacy. In these stories, she was transformed from a runaway slave into a figure of mythic power, a spirit of vengeance who had brought righteous judgment upon a wicked family. She was called the Whispering Pines Spirit, and her legend served as a cautionary tale. It was said that she brought ruin to any family in the area that harbored dark secrets or treated its people with undue cruelty. She became an arbiter of a justice that the law could not provide. The documented consequences, therefore, are twofold. On one hand, there is the complete and utter annihilation of the Whitaker family and their legacy, a powerful line wiped from the earth, their wealth dispersed, their name forever associated with a dark and violent tragedy. They became a historical footnote, a story of madness that served as a grim local curiosity. Their power, once absolute, proved to be a fragile illusion. On the other hand, there is the legacy of Selena, which is one of successful total liberation and a haunting, enduring mystery. She is a ghost in the archive, a person who exists only in the records of her own brilliant destructive act. By disappearing so completely, she achieved a form of immortality. She became a story, a symbol of resistance so subtle and so total that it bordered on the supernatural. Her legacy is a testament to the fact that sometimes the most effective rebellion is the one that leaves no trace save for the ruin of one's enemies. The final legacy of the events of 1862 is the quiet, enduring power of the truth to survive even in fragments. For 100 years, the official story held sway. But the Bible in the tin box, the ledger in the courthouse, and the journal in the writing desk waited patiently. They were dormant seeds of a different history, one that once unearthed would grow to completely overshadow the official lie. The ultimate consequence was the rewriting of history itself, proving that no secret is ever truly safe and no sin is ever truly buried forever. The story of Selena and the Whitakers of Whispering Pines is not in the end a simple tale of blackmail or a macabre family crime. It is a chillingly precise case study in the mechanics of power, hypocrisy, and retribution. A final analysis of the assembled documents reveals that the events of 1862 were not an accident of fate, nor were they the result of a single transgressive act. They were the inevitable conclusion of a system built on a foundation of secrets and lies. The Whitaker family was not destroyed by Selena. They were destroyed by the weight of their own deceptions, a weight that Selena merely guided to its most devastating point of impact. Selena stands as one of the most remarkable figures in the unwritten history of slave resistance. She represents a form of rebellion that is rarely documented because its success is defined by its subtlety and its silence. She did not use a weapon of iron or fire, but a weapon of knowledge. She understood with a terrifying clarity that the greatest vulnerability of a system built on public piety and private sin is the truth. Her genius was in recognizing that she did not need to broadcast that truth to the world. She only needed to deliver it to the one person who would act upon it with the most violent and predictable certainty. Colonel Theodore Whitaker, the supposed villain of the official narrative, is recast in this new history as the ultimate pawn. He was the final brutal instrument of a justice he never understood. His rigid code of honor, his patriarchal pride, and his capacity for violence were the very qualities Selena counted on. She used the master's own ethos to purge the master's house. In doing so, she crafted a perfect closed loop of destruction, a form of poetic justice so complete it feels almost mythic. He was not a madman. He was the system's own self-destruct mechanism. And Selena was the one who pushed the button. The story also serves as a profound commentary on the nature of secrets. The Whitaker secret, a moment of forbidden intimacy, was a private matter that in a different context might have remained just that. But within the rigid, oppressive structure of the antebellum South, it became a fatal liability. Their desperate attempts to conceal it only amplified its power, allowing it to fester and grow until it consumed them. The true poison at Whispering Pines was not the nightshade in the garden, but the hypocrisy that demanded a perfect facade at all costs. And so we are left with the final open question of the narrative. Who was Selena? Was she a traumatized young woman pushed to extraordinary lengths by an oppressive system? Was she a cold, calculating sociopath devoid of empathy? Or was she something else entirely, an agent of a justice that operates on a plane beyond our conventional understanding of morality? The historical record gives us no answers. She appears on the stage, performs her terrible, brilliant work, and then vanishes, leaving only a legend in her wake. Her motives remain locked behind the same impenetrable silence she used as her greatest weapon. The final enduring image of the case is the one that began our investigation. The family Bible holding within its sacred pages a pressed poisonous flower. This artifact is the perfect metaphor for the entire story. It represents the inextricable link between piety and poison, between the sacred text and the profane secret, between the law of God and the brutal earthly justice that was meted out at Whispering Pines. It is a testament to the fact that the most profound truths are often hidden in plain sight, and the most devastating sins are those committed in the name of preserving a righteous facade. The Bible remains a silent witness to a history that was almost perfectly erased. A dark and horrific American story of a family's sin and the slave who turned it into their tomb. If you're captivated by stories that peel back the layers of history to reveal the raw truth beneath, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Join our community of truth seekers as we dive deeper into the shadows of the past. Share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what part of this story hit you the hardest? Stay tuned, because the next untold tale is already waiting to be uncovered.